The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowsky.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you again today. And I want to welcome you once again to the Bear Psychology Radio Show, where we are bearing witness to mood, mind, health. I'm your host, Dr. Anna Baranowsky. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the director of Bear Psychology and the Traumatology Institute. And today we're going to explore something that I think is a really powerful shift in trauma treatment, one that focuses not only on memories and thoughts, but on the nervous system itself. Our guest is psychologist and trauma specialist, Dr. Arielle Schwartz. She's the author of the book, The Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. But I'm telling you, our author today is incredibly energetic in everything that she produces for the community and for trauma healing. So whether it's her yoga work, the polyvagal work that she's done, Dr. Arielle Schwartz is prolific, and that's an understatement. So I'm really thrilled to have her here with us today, and I hope that we'll have a very interesting conversation. Remember, you can always email us at instudio@gmail.com. But before we begin and start asking Dr. Schwartz about what she's doing and how she got here, I want to share a simple but profound idea that has changed how many psychologists and trauma therapists understand healing. For decades, trauma therapy focused primarily on thoughts and memories, and we asked people to talk about what happened, like process the story and challenge beliefs and, get through the trauma. But these, approaches, although they are an important part of our work, neuroscience has taught us something else. Trauma doesn't only live in the memories, it lives in your nervous system, it lives in your body. So when a person experiences overwhelming danger, the body's going to shift into survival, whether that's fight, flight, freeze. These reactions occur faster than conscious thought, and they're biological defenses that are really designed to keep us alive. Our nervous system is here to actually help us. But sometimes the body continues to react as though danger is still present long after the threat has passed. And this can show up as anxiety and panic, emotional numbness, tension, sleep disruption. Oh my goodness, there's so many things. And the suffering is it's a rough journey. So what polyvagal theory suggests, and Dr. Schwartz is going to help us with that, is that trauma recovery is not only about understanding the past, it's also about helping the nervous system rediscover something that it might have lost, the felt experience of safety And that is very helpful news for all of us. And I know we have people who have experienced trauma directly listening to us today. And there are a lot of practitioners who listen to the Bear Psychology podcast, or radio show. So, it becomes kind of a thoughtful reflection, whether it's from a professional or a personal perspective. Dr. Schwartz integrates neuroscience, somatic or body-based psychology, EMDR, mindfulness, and different approaches to help people discover what it takes to work with trauma and help you begin to feel safe in your body. So, to all our wonderful listeners today, thanks for joining us. And as usual, you are very welcome with your comments, your thoughts, your questions, in studio 101 at gmail.com. I want to welcome you so much, Dr. Schwartz, a clinical psychologist, a body and somatic-based trauma therapist. And I think it's reasonable to say that your work really bridges neuroscience with compassion and gives people an understanding of, how to work with trauma. And I've got in front of me the new book. This is one of, I think this is your fifth book or fifth publication, eighth publication. This is the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma, body-based activities to regulate, rebalance, and rewire your nervous system without reliving trauma. So a lot of body-based work. And thanks for joining us today.
Wow, Anna, that was quite an introduction. And I'm actually really deeply touched and impressed by how well you articulated what it means to work with the nervous system as a means to attend to trauma. So thank you so much for having me here.
It's great. It's really, really great that you're with us. I read in the foreword, um, Linda Tai wrote the foreword, and she writes, I came to my understanding of how trauma is held in the body through my own direct experience without the tempering of nervous system and the steadying of the mind through embodied practices. I doubt that I would have been able to move toward the hidden wounds of my inner child. Now, you asked Linda Tai to write for you. So how does this forward kind of land with you, and what do you want people to know about it?
Mm. I think first of all, I love Linda. I love her work. She has touched me at such a deep place in my own process and in my own healing journey, and I feel very proud to call her a friend. I was just with her last week, and we took a beautiful walk in nature, and that's one of the ways in which she and I deeply connect is nature as a kind of regulator for our nervous systems. And one of the ways in which she and I have both really bonded, I would say, and I don't even want to necessarily kind of lean into this as a trauma bond, but perhaps more just the mutual recognition that each of us came into this field. And I think so many of us come into this field because we know trauma intimately, because we know in some way or another, developmentally, that there were some missing foundational building blocks for our own sense of safety and belonging and the ability to just deeply relax within our own soma, within our own bodies. And I knew that when asking Linda to write the foreword, that she would do justice to the book because she speaks with so much compassion and the willingness to say, hey, it's not just those people out there that would benefit from nervous system regulation and attending to trauma. In many ways, it's all of us, whether it's our own personal developmental history or really being part of a collective experience in the world where we are surrounded by cues of threat on a daily basis in the news, in our local communities, in climate changes, in so many experiences that probably in some way or another affect us, whether we're aware of it or not. Sometimes it's even generational or pre-verbal. So, and so that's what Linda's voice meant to me to have her as part of this. It felt like a generous lead in to understand why this book is important.
Wow, very nice. And I like what you said, like you meet Linda in nature, and you said not to refer to the connection between the two of you as trauma bond, but it sounded as you were talking about it like, and you had this beautiful smile on your face, co-regulation, where both of you are going to nature. And even if you recognize that you have a history of trauma, and I think trauma is the great human equalizer. Most people have some kind of trauma story, and many people in our field do. And when you use it as a cue for growth orientation and you use it as a gift, like trauma can be used as a gift to point you in the direction of what healing looks like for you. And really, it's very different for everybody. And you found a very special recipe. I'm a big nature person too. So I as soon as you were saying it, it's like, oh yeah, that's me too. I just need to be in nature. I need to be in nature. That's where it comes from. So that's such a beautiful story of bonding and connection. Not a trauma bond, a co-regulation bond in nature.
Exactly, a healing bond,
Yeah.
a bond around a mutual passion for what's possible when we find that deep restoration at a nervous system level, but also kind of at a soul level.
hmm Wow, that's so beautiful. I think we forget about that, right? I mean, we're such a practical, rational world, and we leave that part of our deeper growth out of most of our conversations. And I think it's very problematic because it's like this sectioning off of a part of our existence that could be used to help us heal and grow,
Mhm.
but then doesn't get used, and it certainly doesn't get used as often enough within a clinical context. So how do you bring that in?
So when we're looking at the experience of attending to this underbelly, if we want to call it, right? Like the underbelly of that which got compartmentalized, that which got pushed down. And I like this word underbelly because when we suppress the vulnerable side of ourselves or the exiled off parts, the it doesn't just disappear, it doesn't go away. It gets pushed down, and it gets pushed down very often into the body
Mm,
because the if I borrow from Bessel van der Kolk for a moment, we can use those words, the body keeps the score. Or Bob Skayer said, the body bears the burden. There is some way in which our body is still holding the truth, even if our mind rises above it, or even if we dissociate from the felt sense in order to survive. And what a brilliant survival strategy, right? We go into intellectualism, or we go into fantasizing about what we want the world to be as a way to cope with, I don't have the tools yet to be with the way the world really is.
mm,
And that's so tender. It sometimes feels so overwhelming to look at the world as it really is, or to look at what we've actually been through personally as it really was.
mhm,
And so when we push down those authentic feelings of fear or shame or anger and rage or sadness and grief, it gets held and it's kind of waiting for us to come back around and eventually find those parts of ourselves, find those feelings, find those places. The other consequence of pushing down or suppressing or repressing, whatever word we want to use, what it is that we're really feeling is that we start to feel like we're going through the world cut off, disconnected, like we're just going through the motions. And there's also this other layer to this that we'll get into as we speak about the nervous system. But there's a way in which we actually don't deeply rest and reside. So many people that I speak to, they say, I'm afraid that if I really rest, if I really let down my guard, I'm going to feel all of that, or I'm going to fall into the abyss, or it's going to get completely overwhelming, or the floodgates are going to open.
yes, yes. Wow, that's perfect. I want to jump into your chapter one. Polyvagal theory is the science of safety. And there's a quote that's attributed to Dr. Stephen Porges, who really was, the early kind of conceptualizers of polyvagal theory. And he says your nervous system is always asking one fundamental question: am I safe? Can you help us to understand what polyvagal theory even is?
Hmm. Yeah. So I'll break down some key essential concepts of the polyvagal theory. First of all, polyvagal is referring to the multiple circuits of the vagus nerve, poly being multiple, vagal being the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. What's essential about this nerve circuitry is that it's a considered to be a kind of super highway of communication between your body and your brain. So everything that I was just sharing before about what the body knows and whether the brain can sense what it is that we're feeling, how does our brain register the feelings of what it feels like to be you? Around your heart, around your belly, and your throat, the feelings get communicated to the brain via your vagus nerve. So this super highway of communication between body and brain is bidirectional. It allows the information from your body to reach your brain. So for example, your vagus nerve will sense changes in your heart rate, will sense changes in your respiratory rate and how you're breathing. Your vagus nerve will sense changes in your gut. And what we know about this gut belly brain that we're equipped with is that our gut isn't just about digesting our food. Our guts help us digest all of our life experiences. Our gut registers what feels good to us and what feels toxic and what's waste, right? Both at a nourishment level, a nutrition level, but also when we meet somebody or we go into a new space, our gut gives us a kind of gut feeling about whether that person or that place feels safe or whether it feels unsavory or I'm not so sure. Maybe there's a threat out there. And so gathering all of this data from your body about what feels good or how your heart rate is or how your blood pressure is. It's going to take all of that to your brain, and then your brain sends signals back down that maybe slows down your heart rate if it's not necessary to be elevated, or maybe helps register the felt sense in your body of, I'm going to gather this sensory data and say, maybe there is a threat out there. I'm going to take us into a sympathetic fight flight response. But your vagus nerve is a key component of your whole autonomic nervous system that sometimes will lead you to go into defensive self protection and sometimes lets you deeply rest.
Mm-hmm.
There's one more thing before we go into maybe another element of this, but there's one more really key component of the polyvagal theory that has a kind of fancy word, and I know we'll talk about this more in some of the upcoming chapters, but this word is neuroception.
Neuroception, yes.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to just define that for our listeners if it's a new word for
I
you.
think I think that's a great idea because I was going to
Mhm.
ask you to do exactly that to
Yeah,
describe what I think Stephen Porges calls the sixth sense.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Our sixth sense. And so neuroception is how our nervous systems, via the vagus nerve, gather all of this sensory data. And when I say sensory data, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, literally what you taste, what it feels like on, on your skin, on the outside of you, what it feels like on the inside of you, your interoceptive feedback. What does it feel like to be inside of your body right now? It even gathers data about where are you in gravity? Do you feel grounded? Are you upright or are you askew? And your nervous system is going to gather all of this sensory data and it's going to use that information to determine, am I safe? Is there a threat? And is that threat life threatening? Is it so dangerous out there that I need to go into whatever it takes to survive this. What's such an important part about neuroception is that it will do this without you even being consciously aware of it. It runs in the background. It's always running to protect you. So let me give a really easy example. If you imagine that you are sitting at a table, let's say you're on a first date with someone, right? It's a pretty easy image, even if it's been, I've been married for 25 years. It's been a long time since one of those first dates. But, if you imagine that you're sitting with someone relatively new at the table and your brain is kind of scanning their voice tone, scanning their facial expressions, scanning their use of eye contact or whether they're looking away, scanning the gestures of their body, scanning what they're wearing, scanning for the smells that come from this person, from the environment that's surrounding the two of you on this first date. So you can imagine all of this sensory information that's coming in. And it's kind of going through a filter that's non-conscious, that your brain is registering those cues of safety or cues of threat. And sometimes we get like, oh, I like the sound of their voice tone. I feel really comfortable as I listen to them, or I like the way that they smile. And those are getting lodged in as like, oh, that feels safe. That feels good. Sometimes we have a certain scent, or maybe it's the cologne that they're wearing. Maybe it's a certain expression on their face, a gesture. And it registers somewhere in your neuroceptive awareness, that background scanning of that reminded me of XYZ from the past. That didn't feel safe. I didn't like that smell. So and so wore that same cologne, right? Or maybe it's just a particular familiarity or a particular registering of the tone of their voice. And suddenly you're going, I'm not so sure I want to be here. I'm not so sure this person feels safe to me. Now, here's what's really tricky about neuroception. It's working on your behalf to keep you safe. And sometimes we get true positives, meaning the brain is registering a threat and there's actually a threat. And sometimes we get something doesn't feel right, but it's actually linked to something in the past. And right here and now, this person in front of me is actually quite fine. I'm not in danger. I'm not in any threat with this person. And maybe one last thing on this is that sometimes those what we'll call kind of faulty neuroceptions, and I don't want to even call it faulty. It's self-protective. It's doing the best job it can to keep you safe. But sometimes we have a false positive, right? It's like alarm going off, but there's no smoke, there's no fire. Sometimes what we're responding to are the unfamiliar cues of safety. Right? Like, think about this. I was just talking to someone recently and she said, yeah, I went out on a few dates with this guy and he was totally available and he was really kind and he was really nice and he was smiling and he paid for dinner, and everything in me went, I don't think I like this. I'm so used to being
Right.
attracted to the bad guy, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really big learning curve, I think. And when you have a big trauma history and your relationships have always had this element of danger in it or uncertainty, being able to actually say, I can learn how to stay present for something that is good, really good. And how to find that is a whole new thing. I want to tell you a story. Because I think this is neuroception too. Um, 2 weeks ago, I was at an outdoor concert. I was with friends, but I was on the dance floor and I was in another country. I wasn't in home. I wasn't in Canada. And on this dance floor, lots of people, a lot of activity going on. And, I'm dancing and, somehow, this woman turns around, she smiles at me and, I smiled back and I for some reason leaned over to her and I said, "Oh, well, I'm only here for another day and I'm heading to the airport." And we got talking. Well, wouldn't you know, she lives within, within 15 minutes of my home, and she had just signed up for the same gym that I go to. So I'm thinking that's neuroception, but it was a positive utility of neuroception perception. What do you think?
Isn't that a wonderful story? I really love this, the way that we might even non-consciously be drawn to a particular person, a particular conversation, a particular place. And this idea of it being kind of a sixth sense is a
Mhm.
really interesting component of this conversation of like, why of all of the people on that dance floor?
Yeah,
Did you have that conversation? And for me, maybe it's neuroception and maybe it's what Jung would call synchronicity, right?
right.
And maybe there's some intersection between the two that I'm not familiar with, but it's a beautiful story of following what felt right.
Mhm,
And I think that's the upside of neuroception.
mhm,
And if we think about, let's give like a really sweet, simple example of following what feels right between an infant and a parent, a newborn and a mom. Okay, when a newborn comes into the world, they come into the world with neuroception intact, right? And neuroception, again, is going to be scanning cues of safety and cues of threat right away. Let's imagine this is a loving, safe, you know, dimly lit, soft music, newborn moment, and newborn is being handed to mama and is in mama's arms. Neuroception is going to turn the eyes towards mama's face, is going to turn the head towards her body, towards the smell of the milk coming in, the smells of her that are so deeply a draw to go toward, right? So neuroception brings us toward what feels good. Not only does it cue us to move away from what doesn't feel good, but now there's soft voice tone, maybe a lullaby, maybe a coo, maybe a joyful sound, right? And there is this exchange that facilitates bonding and attachment through that something about this just feels right. And obviously, in a very different context on a dance floor, you saw this person and you said, she feels right.
Yeah, she
I'm gonna
actually felt
engage.
like
Yeah.
family almost right away. And it's such a funny thing to have that sense. And then to feel I'd never met her before and I don't know who she is. And she told me what her name was and I don't recognize it. And it's just one of those very funny things. She had this kind of energy that felt very comforting, very familiar. It's funny that something like that would happen. Okay, I want to make sure that we get a little bit more information about this polyvagal theory. And there's a couple of words that go along with polyvagal that are synonymous with polyvagal, and that's dorsal vagal and ventral vagal. And what is this all about, and how does it relate to our parasympathetic sympathetic system?
All right, beautiful. So this idea of polyvagal, multiple vagal circuits, the two primary circuits of the vagus nerve are the ventral vagus and the dorsal vagus. Those are purely anatomical terms. Let's just back up for a second because they have additional meanings and we'll get into that. But from a pure anatomy standpoint, ventral means more forward and dorsal means more behind if we look at the anatomy of the body and that the ventral vagal circuit is specialized and it has another term that Steve Porges uses for it, which he calls the social engagement system, because the nerve pathways of this ventral vagus, the upper vagus, travel into your eyes, your ears, the small muscles around your eyes and around your mouth in your face that would create the crinkles around the eyes for the smile and the lifting of the corners of your lips. Um, that same ventral vagus travels down into the larynx and pharynx in your throat, and it kind of again gives that kind of vocal tonicity, the quality of your vocalizations. And then your ventral vagus travels into your heart and lungs. So, this ventral vagus is all about using this upper pathway to determine through eye contact, through facial expressions, through what we hear in our ears and how we express through our voice, to determine those cues of safety, to promote cues of safety to each other socially. And all of that in service of bonding, attachment, and co-regulation. And we'll talk about those, we can define co-regulation in a little bit. But it's basically this beautiful social engagement system, yeah, that allows us to transmit beyond the interiority of my own singular self into the relational space between us, so that we feel each other through this ventral vagus. The dorsal vagus anatomically differentiates from the ventral vagus because the dorsal vagus travels below the diaphragm. So it has shared neural circuitry in the upper portions of the body, but the dorsal vagus travels down through the diaphragm to get to your stomach and your intestines and your pancreas and your gallbladder and your kidneys and adrenals and reproductive organs. So this dorsal vagus has a different set of connections, neural connections, down into the gut and down into the belly brain. When we feel safe, the whole vagus nerve works together as a united circuit to help us rest and digest. We've gathered enough cues of safety that the lower vagus can do its job to help restore the body and digest our food and help us sleep well at night. However, the dorsal vagus also can take us into a very primitive survival response. And this is sometimes we use this term, I went dorsal, or I had a dorsal vagal experience. And it's kind of a misuse of the terminology, but what it's really referring to is my dorsal vagus kicked in to help me navigate a threatening experience where I couldn't flee, I couldn't fight back. And in that scenario, I went into more of a feigned death or a collapse, or I got nauseous, or I felt all of a sudden really fatigued. And in some cases, I literally fainted, right? Like, so these are the kinds of expressions that can come from that dorsal experience: an urge to get small, to withdraw, low energy, and low kind of an immobilization, like the whole body goes towards stillness for the purpose of survival.
This is, and I'm going to go to some of our questions because they relate a lot to what we're talking about right now. This one is from Hannah, who says, interesting show. Thank you very much for your email, Hannah. So this is nervous system stuff. And of course, everything you're talking about winds in the nervous system, right? And that fight, flight, freeze, fawn elements. Yeah. And, when we start to integrate all of that, we start to recognize, wow, that our bodies drive so much of what happens to us, and it has to be part of the conversation. This is another one, and it fits as well because you're talking about how this whole system works, and it relates a little bit more to the therapeutic aspects of it and why this might be meaningful. This is from Brian. Hi, Brian. Thank you for emailing us today. Hello. To the doctors, do physical things such as breathing help as part of this therapy?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, that's a nice place to go. So there's actually, I want to start with Hannah's question and then I'll come back around to Brian's.
Perfect.
So in Hannah, what I hear more is just a reflection. But what I want to speak to is you named fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I'll add faint. And we have all of these
Oh,
F's.
that was me. I
Oh, that
added
was you. Ah,
that.
thank you. But so you name that, Anna, and I think it's so worthwhile to again recognize the range of ways in which we navigate our world and we try and seek safety. But I wanted to pause on the fawn or appeasement response for just a moment because I think it's a little bit less understood in that what is happening neurobiologically when we go into fawning or appeasement. And the way that we best understand this, and I've had conversations with Dr. Steve Porges about this, is that fawning is a kind of recruitment of our social engagement system within a context of threat. So ideally, our social engagement system allows us to make eye contact and vocalize and hear each other in a way that promotes safety and connection. But sometimes when we are experiencing a threat, we'll use that attempt to reestablish a sense of safety. And if I use my social engagement system to take care of you, maybe you'll take care of me. Or maybe you won't hurt me if I, kind of appeal to your, more sensitive nature. And so, we can look at all of these different trauma reactions through that lens of the nervous system. And another piece to distinguish is also a freeze response from a faint response or a collapse, right? A freeze has immobilization built into it. There's a stillness on the external body, but on the inside, our heart is generally rapid. Our heart rate is rapid. Our respiratory rate is in the upper chest. There's a lot of muscular engagement. And it's kind of like a deer in the headlights. Like, what do I need to do here? And sometimes we get stuck in nervous system states for extended periods of time. But just to make this distinction between that freeze response and this immobilization into collapse or feigned death, what is the difference is that there's often a very shallow breath. There's a reduced heart rate, reduced breath rate. Everything slows down. But on the outside, once again, we're very still. So, one of the skills of a clinician who's applying polyvagal theory to treat trauma is that we become skilled at recognizing, is there high activation stuck in the body that's not processed? Or is there a lack of activation of something that got suppressed or never got to be expressed? But because in both cases, what gets altered is the breath, Brian's question is really relevant because what we'll see very often is that post-traumatic stress responses from a nervous system perspective get mirrored by how we're breathing. Maybe we're breathing rapidly in the upper chest and it kind of leads to these feelings of overbreathing and panic and anxiety and vigilance and it's hard to relax, right? So the breath will display a certain pattern that accompanies those symptoms. Sometimes the opposite, we're just not getting enough breath. We're stuck in a very shallow breathing pattern. And either way, no matter where we are in that continuum of the nervous system, working with the breath helps to create more balance and equilibrium. So the most basic of that, and I speak about this, I have a whole chapter on conscious breathing in the book. And when we look at the most basic of the balancing breath practice, it's creating an even length of your inhalation and your exhalation, slowing down the breath to about a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale begins to create this coherency between your breathing, your heart rate, and the tone of your vagus nerve. And it starts to cue the whole body-mind system that it's safe enough now. It's safe enough to feel. It's safe enough to be here. You could move if you wanted to. You can rest if you want to. You're in balance.
I love the use of breathing to really give that message to the nervous system as well, that in this moment we are safe. And it is just such a good way to communicate that with, within, like a true kind of leaning towards ourselves, that true having a relationship with our own inner experience, our own inner world. I like this question. It's from Carl. Thank you, Carl. Can we sing to stimulate the vagus nerve? Does it help?
Yeah, singing, humming, gargling, all of the above. Absolutely. And whether you're singing in the shower or singing in your car or humming yourself a lullaby before bed or humming it to another person before bed, all of that is a beautiful way to bring in deep restoration for your nervous system.
Yes, yes, it's beautiful. This is from Rachel. Thank you for asking, Rachel. The workbook can be found just about anywhere, including on Amazon. It's easy to order, the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. And if you have received our podcast blog or our radio show blog, if you just click on it, you'll find the links to Dr. Arielle Schwartz. You'll find them to the workbook, and the workbook is just filled with exercises. So it's really worth picking up the physical copy, which I have right in front of me right now. And it's got some very useful exercises and images that actually show you some beautiful practices, including one that I'm going to just reference right now, which is the embodied self-compassion practice. And I wonder if you would just walk me through that, because I can see the images in front of me. If we have a few minutes to just go through it, because it's such a good example of kind of that leaning towards, but also finding a way to come to peace in our human relationships as well. And that's a really, really big part, that co-regulation with other people around us, that soothing that sometimes we need if we get like you said, a false positive. We think it's dangerous, but actually there's nothing really dangerous in this environment, and kind of self-soothing, this self-compassion embodied practice. Can you help us with that?
I would love to help you with it. And, one of the things that for me really stands out around this kind of practice is that self-compassion is a concept. And sometimes we get a little bit caught up in our minds of what does it mean to be generous with myself? What does it mean to deeply accept myself? And then maybe we kind of grasp that cognitively, but the body doesn't quite catch up. So, the way that I explore this embodied self compassion is that it's bringing in what we'll call these bottom up felt experiences so that your body and your mind can kind of sync up together. So, one of these, and I'll describe it, for those of you that are listening only. So, I'll describe it that I'd like you to, if you'd like to explore it, to take one of your hands to the base of your skull and just gently cup, almost in the same way that a loving parent would hold the head of a child, right? Just gently cup this area at the base of your skull. The other hand, if it's available to you, is to come over your forehead and to just gently, lovingly hold your own head. Now, it can be a light hold. We're not putting our head in a vice grip. We're just gently, lovingly holding your own head. And I'm going to offer up a phrase. And you might just let this phrase wash over you, or you might decide to repeat it to yourself. And the phrase is, even though I feel distress sometimes, I can hold myself lovingly. And I'll say that again. Even though sometimes I feel distress, I can hold myself lovingly. And as you hold your own head, maybe adding in just a few breaths, mindful, conscious breaths, into the space between your hands. We all feel distress sometimes, and yet we can still practice holding ourselves lovingly. And then so gently let your hands release from your head, maybe come down into your lap, and notice the felt sense in this pause post-practice. Right? How does your body resonate with that? Did the words feel easy for you, or sometimes they don't? Sometimes it doesn't feel quite so accessible. And there's no right or wrong response to the practice. That's what's so important about this, is that you allow whatever comes forward to be there. So if it felt tender and loving, or maybe a little bit of sadness came through, we just allow that to be there. And there's quite a few of these in the book, and I'll do one more for now, and you can find the rest in the book. But I think I'll offer this one because I think it's one of my favorites. And this is an invitation to place one or both hands over your heart. And with your hands over your very own heart, just allowing yourself to feel what it feels like to connect to your heart center. Maybe to send your breath into this space behind your hands, knowing that as you connect into your heart, that your heart is both this physical organ beating in your chest and all that your heart represents, all of the connection to emotion and vulnerability and tenderness that can be there. And I'll offer up a phrase here as well. You can let this wash over you. Even though sometimes I might feel unworthy or unlovable, I recognize that all people, including myself, deserve compassion, love, and support. And just finding your breath, I'll offer the phrase again. Even though I sometimes feel unworthy or unlovable, I recognize that all people, including myself, deserve compassion, love, and support. And notice how it feels to breathe into that space right below your hands, right around your heart. And how does it feel to know that you deserve this compassion, love, and support? It is the birthright of all beings. And then gently, once again, letting your hands come to rest.
Such a beautiful practice. I mean, it's just so, it feels so delicious, so nourishing, so quickly. And I think that's a piece that people don't really recognize, is that the shift can be as quick as changing the channel. And, to allow that possibility of changing the channel, it's such a gift. So
Yeah.
thank you for presenting like these really super practical strategies, because they really work and they really reset the body so quickly.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through a couple more of our questions, and then we're almost at the end of our show. I have to say we've got just over 10 minutes, so let's see if we can get to a couple more of these. So that we can allow ourselves to look a little bit more closely. This polyvagal approach, and what you're really covering here, what would you suggest are the most important aspects that a person can look at in order to really make sense of the approach? Because I know you focus on quite a few different areas within your book. Connection, rewiring your brain, conscious breathing, bilateral movements, mindful movements, resting, restore, and where does somebody need to go? There's a lot, right? But I mean, it's a very rich workbook.
Thank you. Thank you. And the workbook is designed sequentially so that we are building skills throughout the book that kind of culminate in two most essential tools. And I'll just kind of name the preliminary steps. One is that we learn to resource the nervous system. We rewire with practices that are all about stimulating the vagus nerve naturally with self-applied touch, where the vagus nerve comes close to the surface of your face so that we can give the cues to the body mind of what safety feels like. Another key preliminary principle is what we call co-regulation, and it's about nervous system to nervous system connection that happens between us as people that also help us form a deep sense of acceptance and understanding so that we can internalize those experiences of relational regulation, so that supports me to be a better self-regulator. We think of co-regulation as preceding our ability to resource and nourish our own nervous system. Another key element is that we take those skills with us as we begin to challenge the nervous system, because what we know about the world around us is that stress is inevitable. We can create and cultivate these pockets of safety, these experiences of safety in chosen environments. And at some point, we go out into the world and there's all of the unknowns. There's traffic, there's tragedy, there's experiences that we don't have control over. We see it in the news, right? And so it's not about shutting the nervous system into a tight, small box. And I'm always going to say calm, cool, collected. What we recognize is that we're building stress resiliency. We're building our capacity to handle more. So there's a whole chapter on mindful mobilization that basically gives us the tools to know, how do I handle stress? And how can I feel empowered and grounded in my body? Maybe I need to shake it off. Maybe I need to embody a boundary. Maybe I need to find my voice and express myself. And so it walks the reader through that. And then we apply bilateral principles that I learned in EMDR therapy many, many years ago. And we apply the science of why bilateral integration can really help us navigate adversity. And then the final, and if I might add, perhaps most important element, but it comes after all of these other steps, is the rest and restore chapter. It's the rest and restore practices that allow us to safely rest without dropping into collapse, allow us to cultivate better sleep at night, better digestion of our food, the ability to rest and maybe meditate, and meditate in a way that feels deeply satisfying rather than feeling like we're frustrated sitting there with a racing mind. And so we learn how to do a trauma-informed deep rest.
What does a trauma-informed deep rest look like?
Yeah. So one of the tools, and I've been a yoga teacher for 30 years, and I guide students into trauma-informed both mobilization practices, moving your body, and rest practices. So what we know from a trauma-informed rest practice means that you have choice. You can always get up and move if you need to, so that immediately lets me go, oh, I'm choosing to go into this rest rather than somehow I'm immobilizing and I don't have choice around that. The other is that we anchor cues of safety before we go into a resting practice. So maybe it's finding one sensory cue or one imaginal cue that lets me know, I can come back to that word, that phrase, that image, that scent of an essential oil, that grounding blanket, whatever it is, that serves as a cue that lets me know it's safe enough now to go inward, to close my eyes, to be still, and to know that stillness now can be a beautiful gift. Maybe in the past, trauma got kind of confused with stillness. I had to get still, I had to hide, I had to be imperceptible to a potential predator, right? So I got very still. And what we need to do is we need to uncouple the association that stillness now can be safe, can be regenerative, can be restorative.
You also use rhythmic movements within this therapy. This is a question from Sharon, and thank you, Sharon, for that. Um, she's asking, what are these rhythmic movements that are used within this therapy?
Yeah, it's so funny. As soon as you say that, Sharon, I find myself rocking a little side to side. And so, part of my background is, and I'm going to just kind of quote one other beautiful teacher in this field. His name is Bruce Perry, and he has contributed so much literature into understanding how we heal, especially from childhood trauma or even preverbal trauma. And what we know is that our bodies respond to rhythm. And so rocking movements, swaying movements, I have a course that accompanies the book. It's called Let Your Body Hold You. And it's also with New Harbinger, and it's on the New Harbinger website. And this course walks you through literally practice by practice, every practice that's in the book via video. And one of the video segments there uses a physio ball, for example. And so sitting and rocking side to side on a physio ball or forward and back on the physio ball, or even in a rocking chair, or even just in your own chair where you are right now, rocking a little side to side or forward and back, it is like nourishment for the brainstem. And it helps get into these subcortical areas of the brain where those early trauma disruptions of rhythms are held. And we get to heal again from the bottom up, from the body to the brain, from the nervous system to the mind.
Mm, that's so beautiful. And I'm going to pick up this one because it's such an important piece. This is from Joyce. And Joyce says, hello. Thank you, Joyce. Can we use this therapy for our personal lives as well, and not just for therapy with issues?
Yeah, I
Right?
love that question,
Yeah,
Joyce.
me
Thank you
too.
for that question. I think that maybe it goes back to a kind of premise that I carry right now, that it's hard to be human regardless, right? Like even if I don't personally identify with a history of personal trauma adversity, I think that these are tools for life. And that when we are tending to our own nervous system, we show up with more calm, more equanimity, more balance everywhere, whether it's in your workplace or parenting your kids or in all of your relationships or in your community. And the world benefits from the ways in which our nervous systems become these co-regulating sources of nourishment for each other.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful. So, I think it's really interesting. Maybe if we could just close with this. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us and, sharing your thoughts and your wisdom around this in such a kind of sweet way, because it really comes across as such a well developed way of working with polyvagal. And I've read and I've listened to other speakers, but you seem to have taken it out of the intellectual and into this is what really you need to do in order to find some peace within inside of yourself. Call it whatever you want. Just recognize that there are certain things that need to be brought on board to nourish and soothe your body. We literally have 1 minute left. Just one more thing. If a listener could begin with just one practice today to support their nervous system healing, what would you share with them before we finish today?
I think that the practice that we did, the embodied self-compassion, is
Yeah.
honestly my favorite, and it to me, whenever we can turn towards ourselves lovingly, that is a game changer. And it takes time, and we call it a practice for a reason because it doesn't always come naturally, but it's something that we can strengthen through repeated practice.
And I love that so much because I find that in most cases, when people get to a much better place within inside of themselves, daily practice is a game changer. And just like you, Ariel, I know that you have your background in Kripalu and I have my background in Iyengar practices. And I've been practicing for many, many, many years. So when I say to people, do what you need to do to take care of yourself, and invest in your own daily practices. And I want to thank you very much, Ariel, for joining me again with your wonderful work. And I'll look forward to speaking with you again in the future. And thank you so much. And I wish everybody have a gentle day.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, right here on Reality Radio 101.